believe that we are called to be co-creators with the original creator, that our job is to make our whole lives a creative act.
I think all of us have an ability to create.
You have to have a developed what?
Imagination. Imagination.
Yes. There's tremendous risk involved in creativity. For one thing, probably a lot of the things we think up and do are going to fall flat on their faces.
One of the most important elements in creativity, in the creative process, is play. You've got to have fun.
I know that there is a spiritual force that is expressing itself through me, this work. I am the conduit.
For people to be really creative, at some very fundamental level, they've got to connect with the divine.
My name is Frederick Hart, and I'm a professional sculptor and have been for 25 or 30 years. The thing that staggered me initially about the whole concept for the West Facade was the idea of creation as an ongoing process, that it was not, the single literal act that is described in Genesis, but it reflects a condition of the universe and a condition of man. The Adam figure is meant to evoke our aloneness, each of our singular relationship with being and trying and awakening, whereas the temple itself above it is meant to reflect the community of man. And it's a group that is orchestrated or choreographed in a state of becoming out of a torrential force. They are being formed and they're forming themselves and being forced almost into an awakening, almost a reluctant awakening. The phrase ex nihilo means out of nothing, out of the void. And it speaks about the nature of God in being able to bring forth being and mind and spirit and soul out of total nothingness. That's creation.
At the same time that we work on the material. I mean, someone like Rick Hart is working very hard over months and years on the material. At the same time, I think the material affects the artist. Every artist, by his or her work, whether it's painting or sculpture or dance, changes by virtue of what they do.
The surprising, to me, one of the results of all this was that I became a Roman Catholic convert. I was not really the kind of person that you would consider a likely candidate for that. The other result is really it's defined my view of art and what I do. Probably for the entirety of my career, it is all everything that I do now has evolved out of that experience of the ex nihilo and the idea of creation. Well, it's very similar in a lot of ways to the cathedral work, in that this is based on a balance between being and nothingness, a void in consciousness and form, human spirit versus the abyss. And the balance between the three servicemen and the wall is that same kind of balance, because the wall is just this great, overwhelmingly tragic, unknowable, unspeakable calamity. It's the void. It is in its way the abyss itself, or evocative of the abyss. And the soldiers are these frail, young figures poised in relationship to that terrible vision of their mortality. creativity is, in my view, is being able to be receptive and allow the creation itself and allow the work of God to reverberate on you, to reflect on you, and you are composing your reactions and reflections of that experience. And that's what a work of art is. You're not a creator in the sense of being a co-creator, as a lot of people call it. You know, there is only one creator, and artists, we're just little specks on the great sidewalk of the cosmos.
Well, to me, it's very exciting to think that God took something so tiny as to be nothing and made everything. And that we are all part of that everything. I'm made of the same stuff as stars are, so are you. I mean, we have within us the same original material. And one of the wonderful things that does is to help us to understand the total interrelationship of all of creation in a planet that seems to be getting more and more fragmented into various religions and various wars. But we are meant to be one because we all come from one creative act, one small, tiny thing that became everything. I'm Madeleine L'Engle, and I wrote my first story when I was 5 with an intuitive understanding that if we want to know what our lives are about, what everything is about, story is our vehicle. Facts are very limited. Story bursts beyond the limits and gives us an idea of why we're here, what we're about. Yes, somebody does care. It does matter. The journey is important. I'm a writer. I'm a writer who happens to be a struggling Christian. I'm often asked if my Christianity affects my writing. I say no. My writing affects my Christianity. It's the other way around completely. I stray, the work pulls me back. When I wrote A Wrinkle in Time, it was for me a theological enterprise. And I really thought I had done something good. And as the rejection slips kept piling up, I'd get the kids to bed, I'd go take the dogs and walk down the dirt road, and I would say, God, why all these rejection slips? You know it's a good book. I wrote it for you. Silence. The stars just kept on shining. But I did. And so when I write, I try to give God pleasure. And if God is not pleased, I don't think anybody else will be. It's in its 53rd hardcover printing, and which doesn't happen very often, and it's sold millions in paperback. I forget who it was who said, writing is easy. You just sit and stare at the paper till the drops of blood form on your forehead. It does take discipline. You have to do it every day. You can't just do it when you feel like it. You have to write every single day. And I start and end the day with a scripture, both Old and New Testaments, as setting the day as God's day, not my day. And that gives me a challenge and also courage. An artist discovers things. I mean, everything is there. A discoverer uncovers things that are there. An inventor takes inventory of what is already there. So you find something, and then you want to share it. And it was Picasso's idea that you're not looking for something, you're sharing what you have found. And I think that the artist, subconsciously, if not consciously, is always searching for the divine, always searching for that which is beyond what we are, that spark that lights the darkness. We're always looking for that, and then finding it, trying to share it.
According to the story in Genesis, if we take this as a model for being creative, one of the things that is done is that God makes the world, and then he says, he saw that it was good. Now, it seems to me that in our world, we make a lot of things. We think we're creative, but we don't ask the question, is this good? See, I think that creativity is not really about self-expression as the expression of myself as an isolated individual. It has to do with the context. If you're really going to be creative on the model of Genesis, we're going to make a world that's good for everybody. It's not just pleasing myself and saying, look, I've done something extraordinary and wonderful. But you have to ask the second question. Is it good? Does it contribute something to the community in which I live? If it doesn't, then it's not creative, I would say.
What I'm writing is a prayer for family, Sweet Mother, I give myself to your arms, and I ask that you pray to God for me and for my family. I like to write the prayers about family. I think that it's almost a prayer for self, family, community, and the world. So those are my favorite kinds of prayers.
My name is Arturo Vasquez. I'm a folk artist here in San Antonio, Texas. I, along with my wife, do nichos or home altars.
We call our art nichos because traditionally it comes from the word niche, or to have a place on a wall or on a corner somewhere that you keep the saint. In the early, in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, as the southern part of Texas was really evolving and developing, the businessmen, especially for instance in San Antonio, discovered that they needed to do business with the Hispanic population, the Mexicanos. So what do you identify with a Mexicano but their religious symbols? And of course, the proximity of the printing presses in Monterrey provided them a lot of images. So what the businessmen started to do, in order to gain the trust and to reach out to the Mexican community, was to get the images, stick them on a calendar, and go into the barrio and say, here is your calendar of the Virgen de Guadalupe. If you need a refrigerator, here it is. Call my number. And here's my calling card, and my calling card has the Virgen de Guadalupe on it, so therefore you can trust me. And that's what started my mother and everybody else cutting the calendars off at the end of the year and framing them and adding them to the home altar.
Now, the niches are very unique and very original to San Antonio and very special to us, because at a time when we didn't have the ability of getting religious articles to decorate our homes, the niches just emerged as something very natural. I remember we used to make them out of old cigar boxes. Of course, cigar boxes then painted very beautifully with flowers or decorations, and put a little candle in front of it. So in a way, it was taking the ordinary and bringing out the sacredness of the ordinary. And that became the source of our home altars. That became the source of our sacred imagery.
Growing up, I didn't want to be like my mother. My mother would pray for us. My mother would go to her altar in the home and dialogue with the saint for 15, 20 minutes a day. And I would look at her and I'd say, why does she do that? So, and in growing up and going to school and trying to achieve, to me that meant, because it was taught to me in school, that being Mexican wasn't okay. Speaking Spanish like my mother and my father was not okay. So everything that I equated with my mother and father, religion or saints or speaking Spanish, was not okay. Therefore, if I wanted to be okay, I had to reject those things. And that happened to a lot of us growing up in the 50s and the 60s. We began to reject all of this. And as we grew older and educated ourselves and got jobs, and our parents passed on, we were, in a sense, lost. I was lost when my mother passed away, because I had a son, and I wanted him to not only embrace my culture, but to feel a part of my mother. And one of the ways that I felt comfortable in doing was when I did the research on the nichos. It's Hispanics that are saying, it's okay to be us. It's okay to have an altar in the home, just like Mama did, because we need something that is stable for our family, something that is there to where they can say, this is home.
Okay, here we go. Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring from Cantata 147 of Johann Sebastian Bach. I'm Jamey Turner. I'm a musician, I play the glass harp, and I'm an explorer of sound. My glass harp is made up of 60 brandy snifters of many, many different sizes, all the way from a 232-ounce brandy snifter to a 2-ounce Hungarian cordial. And they're upside-down glass bells. It's approximately 4 octaves. The top half of the piano is what I'm dealing with. It's an instrument that has a history of over 300 years. 400 compositions have been written for it, at least. My parents used to play wine glasses around the dinner table in Montana. You know, it's like a lot of cold winter nights and no television. And we just had a great time playing all sorts of things, making music in unusual ways, as well as playing ordinary instruments. And it just happened that I loved that sound. Several years ago, my wife, Mary Turner, suggested that I put "To God Be the Glory" on my card. We both absolutely love Johann Sebastian Bach. And that's what he had in Latin, "To God alone the glory," at the bottom of almost every manuscript after he wrote it, because he was so grateful for this music that was coming from him. In my performance with the National Symphony Orchestra at the Kennedy Center for the Princess Grace Memorial Concert, I played the aquarium section of the Carnival of the Animals of Saint-Saëns. And Saint-Saëns had this great sense of humor, and he made fun of all of his contemporary musician friends, composer friends, but he had this wonderful whimsy. So he wrote the aquarium section and had a glass player, there must have been some glass harpist in France in the late 19th century, play this wonderful piece. A song from the Jewish tradition called Song of Hope, or Hatikva. One of the things that my instruments, especially my glass harp, expresses as a metaphor is the fact that they're very common, very ordinary glass. They are not crystal. They're very, very simple, ordinary stemmed glasses. And many people think of themselves as very ordinary, very common, without much except very utilitarian use. You know, I've got a job, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, family, but not thinking of themselves as very special and very ordinary. And yet out of this very ordinary glass comes an extraordinary sound that is within the glass all the time. It was there all the time, but you didn't know it. It's been a marvelous experience performing with symphony halls and concert halls and corporations and this sort of thing all around the country. But what a profound experience it is as well to play on the street. That's right, you really feel the vibration. You can see the ripples in the water. My wife Mary and I decided that wherever else I'd play, I'd always play on the street, wherever we lived. And it's the importance of bringing beauty to the street. So often we just hear these horn sounds and buses and whatever, and yet people need beauty so much in their lives. They need to experience it every day. Thank you. Thank you.
In a certain sense, creativity is not something, it's an attitude, it's a way of being in the world. It's not just making something, it's a way of being. And I think that in order to do that with any regularity, we have to live all the time with that creative spirit. That means being open to being influenced, to hearing things, to having thoughts that come and you think, I think our tendency, especially in the modern world, is to say this is not practical or it doesn't make any sense. The creative person says, I don't know what this means, but I'm going to entertain it for a while and see where it goes. And so there's it's a mode of living, and it's the kind of thing that can be done every minute of every day.
And for years, I used to have a sign on the door to this studio that said this: an artist is not a special kind of person. Every person is a special kind of artist. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that? Good. We're halfway home. My name is Catherine Kapikian, and I am Artistic Director of the Center for the Arts and Religion at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. I began the program at Wesley Seminary in 1980 after I had spent 4 years at the seminary earning a Master's of Theological Studies degree as a working artist. And very simply, I began it as a great experiment because I felt that my experience of theological education was deeply truncated because of the absence of the arts, and in particular, the visual arts. I just couldn't understand a theological education without a commitment to the arts.
I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and I'm worried about drawing. I think I'm really creative, but I'm a little worried about drawing.
Most of the students have had no experience in any sort of art form, in the creation of an art form. And 90% of them are totally convinced they cannot draw. And as you can see, we had preliminary drawings that bears some of that truth out. But to open up their minds and give them access to a part of their mind that they've not easily accessed before is what is so thrilling to me as a teacher. Because I think that's life-changing activity. And I think it's particularly important going into ministry. It's not that you all are going to wind up drawing together the same way. In fact, you're going to be absolutely, utterly astonished at the paradox. And that is that the more you draw capably what you see, the more is your drawing going to disclose you. That is the incredible paradox. And the curious phenomenon is that I can guarantee you at the end of the class that you're going to be able to say, that's Betsy's drawing, that's Tom's drawing, that's Cheryl's drawing. And you all may be drawing the same thing. I discovered a long time ago that I prefer expressing myself with a pair of scissors in my hand than I do a paintbrush. Each work that I create is unique to a space. I take all my visual cues from the space, the sight lines, the colors, the scale of parts, and all of that. And I walk through these community religious spaces with the congregants who reside there. And we then read the space together, and I worship with them and learn who they are, how they think and feel to some extent, and try to wed my sense of their space with what they would like to have in that space. The work that I designed at the Metropolitan United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C., I designed the tapestry, and the community fabricated it. I'd love to experience that moment when others discover what a joyful thing it is to work with their hands and create something.
I'm Father Thomas Hand. I'm a Jesuit priest, and I've been here at Mercy Center for about 10 years. My work is mainly retreat and meditation program work. Our meditation room here at Mercy Center, we call it the Rose Room because the unfolding, blossoming rose is the symbol for enlightenment in the West. Externally, things are somewhat Zen-like. People sit on the floor and so forth. But it is not strict Zen. It is really Christian contemplation. Opening our hearts and our hands as wide as the heart of Christ. And silently extend to others the blessing, the grace of this meditation. Meditation really makes a person creative, because if you really get down deep into the sense of the divine everywhere, the divine is constantly creating, literally. And the result is that in order to get there, you have to let go of all your hang-ups to begin with, so you're much more free. And so people become spontaneous. They're creative in what they do because they have no more hang-ups, and they are literally getting into the flow of divine creation.
This is holy ground. We're standing on holy ground. For our God is present, and where God is holy.
There is plenty of room for creativity in prayer. And first of all, in the forms that prayer takes. You can pray in movement, in walking, in dance, in ritualistic kind of prayer. You can pray with music.
Being creative means to develop the skill, really, the skill of being able to listen to those things, to be silent, to silence the ego, to let those voices speak, and to let the creativity come from the soul, I would say, rather than from the self. So it's not self-expression, it's soul expression, to be really creative. And if that's true, you don't have as much control over that kind of expression, or whatever it is you make or think or create. You don't have as much control over it as if it were an ego thing. And therefore, I think it has more depth. And I know as a writer, and I'm sure a lot of writers and other people, anyone doing any kind of work at all or doing anything, can stand back and say, well, I thought I was doing this, but actually there's a sense in which I have not done all this myself. I can look at whatever is out there and I can be surprised and interested and wonder about it in the same way someone else does, because it's not the expression of myself, it has come through me in some way. I go back in about 500, 600 years in order to find some good ideas about creativity. And one of the thoughts they had at that time was that the dignity of being a human being comes from being creative. And the dignity is related to the fact that as human beings then, we are in a sense close to divinity, close to what is divine, to the divine in being creative. I mean, God made the world, we make things, we continue to make the world. We do something with this world. And, but that notion of creativity is not just the making, it is making a world that we can live in. And so these Renaissance painters, and I mean, the people we tend to think of as these wonderful, great, extraordinary artists, were able to live in a communal context in the cities. And they could be supported by merchants and by business people who didn't understand what they were doing most of the time, but knew that it was valuable. I think that this is something important for us, that if we could recognize that our work, whenever we're being creative, in a sense, we're rising above our humanity in a way.
The crucifix is a fairly late icon. I don't think it was until the 11th century that it was more or less adopted as the symbol of the Christian faith. And it's not a good symbol in a sense of telling you everything it should, because what it tells you immediately is that there's a dead person here. It does not tell you about the resurrection, which is the most important aspect of the whole thing. So I wanted to do something which could simultaneously deal with this traditional icon, but could indicate very, very definitely and very strongly the whole transcendental aspect of the crucifixion. I started tinkering with the lucite in 1972 or 3 when I was tinkering with creation. And I was intrigued with it because of just this relationship of being and non-being, and of things that come out of nothing and go back to nothing, as done in the ex nihilo, with the playing with the index refraction of lucite. By making things, changing the index refraction ever so slightly or grading it, I could make things appear and disappear in the way I embedded sculpture within sculpture. In a garden, the very source of all life is sun and water, water especially. And this figure came as a personification of the abundance, the magical abundance of life, because the water, it looks like she's holding a ball of water, like she's holding literally the source of all life itself.
It's not simply a matter of looking at our environment and seeing the beauty of the landscape, or seeing the elegant shape of a human body and admiring its exquisite proportions. But it's being able to see, even in what is ugly and painful and suffering, the possibility of transformation. And that's a contribution that, and a complex political contribution that Christianity makes, it seems to me, to the understanding of what creativity is about, and about our responsibility for also being creative. Because it is not just, it seems to me, that in our day-to-day lives we pick a time or a place where we can help and reshape something, but it's also that we fundamentally understand that our responsibility is to reshape the universe, to transform what is ugly into what is beautiful.
Back in the days when Columbia was a male bastion, there was a woman who ran one of the elevators. It's about as menial a job as you can have. Running that elevator was her vocation. She made the young men say good morning, please, and thank you. If it was rainy, she made them go back for their galoshes, put on their mufflers. She ran that elevator with a total sense that this was her calling. And when she died, the church couldn't hold the people. In her own way, running that elevator was an intensely creative act. And it was seen as such. She was very, very much loved because she cared. She cared about every young man who came into that elevator. She personally felt responsible that he'd not get his feet wet, that he'd have a hat on if it's snowing. She loved them. And that is complete creativity.
For a lot of employees, being 9 to 5 means giving up creativity, giving up the soul and the spirit. I can do it after work. I can go do the things that I really love. So that work takes on the arena of being a place where I'm selling my soul, where I'm giving up my power. My name's Martin Root. I've been working with major Fortune 500 companies, both the US and Canada, for about 10 years now, looking at helping them create their vision. Where do they want to go? And it became clear to me about 8 years ago that there's a deeper, more fundamental issue, which is what I'm now devoting myself to, namely spirituality in the workplace. That spirituality, for me, is the basis from which vision and other things begin to come. So I began to ask the question, what is the current state of spirituality in the workplace? And what do you think I found? I found that people were afraid to talk about it. At times they would even physically react. They go, spirituality in the workplace.
when I brought up the subject. When I brought up the subject, people were scared. They thought that I was going to be dogmatic. They asked me not to talk about spirituality. Don't use the S word, everybody said. Talk about ethics, talk about integrity, but don't use the S word. They wanted me to speak in euphemisms, in coded language. They'd say, look, it's just not okay in today's business world to discuss this topic. But no, I said, I wanted to talk straight up about God and about spirituality in the workplace. I want to use those specific words. So my tradition is clearly the Jewish tradition, but I have throughout my life spent many wonderful hours in many different traditions. Creativity to me means the connection with the divine. I see creativity and spirituality inextricably linked. For people to be really creative, at some very fundamental level, they've got to connect with the divine. And let me make that very simple. In order for you to be creative, you have to have an idea. You take that idea, you put it into action, and you produce the result. I mean, that's the flow. The question is, what happens before the idea is present? Where does the idea come from? It comes to you, but where does it come from? It comes, for me, from the divine, from God. The more you're connected with that, the more creative you can be. By viewing people as spiritual and seeing how the spiritual is unlimited in its potential, we can unlock more creativity, more productivity, and more genius. We can take the toughest problem, the toughest issue, and we can solve it.
I would much rather see us think of creativity as something that we do every day. It's part of the craft of everyday life, and it doesn't make any difference what we're doing. We can be creative with it. What does that mean? It means that we're not just doing something unconsciously and by rote. We're not just doing something that everybody else is doing. There's an element of individuality in it. And I think we can each do our work that way, thinking that this is the way I do this, whatever it is. It could be setting a table, or it could be writing music, it could be working in the garden, it could be going to work. Whatever you do, that can be a creative act, I think, if we see it as this moment where I am doing something and I'm going to do it in a way that is particularly mine.
I am a father, as some of you know, of a lot of children, not biologically, but by choice. Like many of us in America, I too was faced with the fear and concerns of seeing young urban children who have been pulled apart from our society and see the results of that, not being able to read and write and not being able to be a part of a family. We had a standing rule in the house. Any child, anytime, any place can be a part of this family. Bring them home. And we will provide to them whatever they need to bring them up to the level of their fullest of capacity. For some, that meant very little. For others, that meant a full gamut of responsibility, from housing, clothing, feeding, nurturing, anything you can imagine. And we did that. And you don't stop doing it for your child. So that's how you end up doing it for almost 14 years now. And that's how the number grows from 1 to 87.
Well, the one thing I've learned is that we have a capacity to love and to care for more than what we realize. And by that I mean, if you have 1 child or 2 children or 3 children, you think, oh, that's so much to care for. I can also say that all the young people that have come into our home, I've genuinely cared for. We've cared for. And if the number is 80 or if it's 2, it really didn't seem to matter.
We've had the privilege of seeing our children grow and prosper, graduate from college and go on to productive lives. We've also had the pain of seeing 4 of our children die to violent homicide, 1 of our children give up and commit suicide. And from that experience combined, we realized that it was a bigger issue out here, and we had the capacity to do something about it. That's how the Urban Family Institute was born.
And our mission is to create and/or recreate environments where children have safe, nurturing, caring adults surrounding them at all times, whose sole purpose is to ensure their healthy nurturance into productive adults.
We take this notion that it takes an entire village to raise a child, and we interpret that as the nurturing village. And what we have done is crafted new villages in a 21st century reality in urban centers, where we put boundaries around a physical place, and we call it a village. We go out, the Institute says, all right, we're going to take responsibility for 22,000 children in our nurturing village. Can you say that one institution can care for them? No. But we have a whole host of people available to us, and we available to them. They're in 17 elementary schools, 4 junior high schools, 4 high schools, a host of churches from every single denomination, 19 family and child serving agencies, every form of government, including the White House. It's interesting because what happened was we were talking about this in public forums, and a pastor heard it and said, you know, why don't we at Mount Olivet Lutheran assume the responsibilities for some of the children in our community? And they did.
Okay, hands down. You ready to do the blessing? Yes! God is great. God is great. God is good. And we thank Him for our food. We want to thank Him in the morning, noon, and night. We want to thank Him because He's out of sight. Amen. 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 Okay.
When you see a kid's house, some people would assume, well, that's nothing but after-school care. Looks like any other after-school environment. Kids' house to us, what makes it special is this notion of extended family in a 21st century reality, taking people who come from a variety of different backgrounds to form family for children. What it is the community saying, our responsibility is to our children, and we're going to do something about it in this place, 7 days a week, every single day. Same set of adults, same set of children. Who is Marian Anderson?
She was a famous black opera singer.
That's correct.
9.
I would suspect that if the kids who come to the Kids House now were not in this kind of environment, that they would more than likely go home to either an empty house or go home and sit in front of a television set or hang out in the street.
And you got to be courageous when you bring a child into your life. If a child is in your life, you're saying, hey, I'm going to take this responsibility of taking care of this child's welfare. And as we talked about, not only having a house for a couple of hours, maybe a house for 24-hour care, because some of the kids need that. Okay, y'all had a great week, and we're going to have a better week next week, right?
Creed, Carter.
You want to say the creed now?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to stand up. There's the power greater than myself, who loves me exactly as I am. I am worthy. Share the peace.
All right.
This Congress of ours, in all of its laws, must find a way to empower communities and neighborhoods to read and unite themselves to provide a seamless web of care for our children and not find a way to continue to the despair.
My faith tells me that I have a responsibility to reach out my hand to my fellow man. And that faith comes from my own teachings of Christ on the cross. And he was a symbol of hope. We are imperfect, but collectively, that's what hope is.
I hang on.
You hang on? Yeah, I want you to do that, son. Hang on here.
I congratulate all of you for returning today. I gave you the toughest task of all last night, which was to go home and draw a face from the three-quarter view, because it demands absolute total discipline, demanded full concentration, an absolute total absorption. And if you're satisfied with what you did, joyful about it, put it up there for us to see. If you want to share with us the very first drawing of your first day, as a contrast, to compare and contrast, you can do that too.
The man I was drawing, he's a friend of mine and the husband of a good friend of mine. He was fooling with his guitar, and he didn't want to be sitting still for this. So his anxiety was converted to me, and I felt rushed in trying to get it.
Is that your drawing on
that's
top?
The one before.
Oh, the lavender one. Yeah. The lavender one. Oh, my word.
It's a little better.
Look at that. Don't you think there's beauty in this drawing?
I'm very typical in that I would just walk by people and sort of glance at them. But now I really look at faces, and I see the shapes and spaces in that. And creation is just so pretty.
Well, it seemed to me like something happens between the sitter and the artist, too.
Oh.
In that, I mean, it seemed to me that I fell in love with my husband in a slightly different way because of staring for an hour.
That's a lovely drawing.
I'm so thrilled. I really am. Yeah. Yeah, I've never been able to do anything like this.
Is that so?
That's very satisfying.
Yeah.
And that's your first one on the
This
right?
was from the artist's formative period. Yeah.
Okay.
But this is Elsa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've definitely caught Elsa. Come over here. Come next to it. You've definitely caught a quality of Elsa, and you've caught yourself as well. All right, there you go. See? 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 Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Now and you go up there, Tracy, and sort of look back at us, because there's a quality in the no, in the eyes, the size of the eyes and so forth. There's a tremendously revealing. I mean, we would know that that's your drawing and not somebody. Turn around. Let us look at you.
I can't believe it.
Believe it. Believe it. How much of Dawn is in that face? Huh? 90%. Yeah, there's more. Yeah. I mean,
a little difference in the hair.
Yeah, yeah. But Dawn, you're more in your drawing than Elsa this time.
Creativity is not simply something that happens with special people in special places at special times, but it's something that goes on in our spiritual quest and our spiritual journey day after day, minute after minute, time after time, into eternity.
I think it's easier to live creatively if one loves creation. And I sometimes tell my students that you have to fall in love 3 or 4 times a day, or it's just not worth living. I mean, I'm laughing when I say that, but I actually believe that. And you know, you can fall in love with an emergency room if you're a medical doctor, or you can fall in love with a boatyard if you make boats, or you can fall in love with little pieces of tin that reconfigure into some sort of wonderful instrument. But you know, the context doesn't matter. I think it's the issue is really to love creation.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-235-USCC. The preceding program was a production of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops.